president of the African Development Bank stated that Africa could easily quadruple its agricultural output by 2030. Are we witnessing the coming agricultural revolution in Africa? What does this mean for food shortages, poverty, and also business opportunities? In today's episode, we will talk about great African initiatives that aim to solve the trade problems small farms experience and the huge potential in agriculture for Africa. We are honored to do this in our 4-part series together with the Netherlands African Business Council. And today we are with Christian Desmar de Jabrun, the CEO of Sambuco. Welcome, Christian.
Thank you very much.
Of course, I'm not here by myself. I'm Yuri Nortier, by the way. I will be your host for today, but next to me sits my exceptional co-host, Jos. Jos, how are you doing? And how are you looking forward to an episode about agriculture?
I'm doing great, and I'm looking forward to it, especially because my favorite co-host, the favorite co-host of the Africast, or the favorite guest of the Africast, just came in. Arne Doornbal is here with us today.
Welcome, Arne.
Thank you very much. Great to be here again.
Arne Doornbal of the Netherlands African Business Council.
So for all the regular listeners, this is an NABC episode, so it's in English, but maak je geen zorgen, want al onze andere afleveringen zijn natuurlijk nog steeds in het Nederlands.
Wow, French, English and Dutch. Yuri, you're a man of the world.
Oh man, I'm just getting started. But before we dive into the prosperous opportunities for businesses in Africa, but also for European businesses, of course, we need to get back to the basics. On average, African GDPs are dependent on agriculture, sometimes even for 1/3. Also, on average, 2/3 of the people work in agriculture. Despite so many people working in agriculture, there are often food shortages in sub-Saharan Africa. Christian, I'm just wondering, how is it possible that so many people in Africa work in agriculture, but that there are still food shortages?
Well, that's a very, very good question. I think there is so many answers to that. I guess one of them is that whatever we produce that is of quality gets exported, and then we have to import the low quality of it. That's basically one of the biggest problems we have in terms of the food shortages, and also quite often there's involvement of cartels in there. So controlling of the prices, more likely the lower side of it, so which makes it rather difficult to get the agricultural sector out of the poverty-stricken ways that they have at the moment.
You are the CEO of Sambuco. Could you tell us a little bit more about Sambuco, the company, but also how you deal with these problems within the country that you're active in?
So basically, Zambuco Market, we're a B2B marketplace. Originally, that's how it started, but we've had to pivot a little bit into marketing with the catapult effect being the B2B marketplace. So one of the main verticals that we're involved in is agriculture, and we're here to bridge the problems that are currently faced by the agricultural sector. In terms of lack of investments, lack of market, lack of due diligence, etc. So on both sides of the spectrum. So one of the key things that we do is we conduct systematically a due diligence with the people that we work with. We've got presence on the ground at all times, and yeah, the marketplace is a digital addition and value that is needed in Africa. Unlike traditional tech offices, we do actually spend some time on doing the groundwork. So bridging agricultural old practices with new practices.
My Zambian is a little bit rusty, but if I'm not mistaken, Zambuco means bridge, right?
Yes, actually in Shona from Zimbabwe. So yes, the word means bridge, and that's what we're trying to do.
Where are you now, Christian?
I'm in Harare in Zimbabwe at the moment, and I'll be in Nairobi next week, and I'll be moving around quite a bit for the purpose of growing Zambuco. At the moment, our target is the SADC region, so the 15 countries plus Kenya in East Africa.
Another person who is moving a lot in Africa is Arne, sitting here in Utrecht. Just came back from Tunisia, going to Algeria soon. Arne, are there businesses like Sambuco who act a little bit like it that you know of at NABC?
Yeah, but if you allow me, I would first like to, react to what you said in the beginning of this, like the presumed food shortages in Africa. I mean, I think to a large extent, it is presumed, it is in our mind that that is the case, because the issue isn't so much the lack of food. The issue is more that certain people do not have the funds to actually buy it, which is a complete difference. It's not that there's structural shortage of food in Africa. However, it is certainly possible to quadruple food production because, for example, there's a lot of things. For example, I was visiting a seed company yesterday, and they said like with improved seeds, you can easily quadruple output even from normal existing land without too much technology.
Does that lower the price as well?
It should. It should, but it doesn't.
It costs a little bit more money because you actually have to buy the seeds. Of course, that is the whole thing. But then eventually your yield is going to be higher, and when there's more supply, yeah, then prices should eventually come down. It's not a guarantee, though.
Christian, you said that it should, but it doesn't.
Exactly. It doesn't. I mean, regardless of the way you look at it, I mean, when you start producing more and more of a certain crop, you're always expecting that the prices are going to drop. We've noticed here in Southern Africa and Zimbabwe, prices don't drop. We had a situation where we had everyone starting to grow soybean, and when the yields came out, government stepped in and said, "Thank you very much. You have to sell to GMB, so the Grain Marketing Board, which means they dictate what the prices are. And obviously, if you've put in quite big investments, well, you're actually going to come short because of situations like that. But the fact that you're producing more and have got higher yields does not necessarily dictate in Africa the drop in prices, which is a real problem for sure. I mean, we also see it across quite a few trades between Europe and Africa. I mean, I was paying over €3 green beans that were coming from Zimbabwe in June when I was still in the south of France, and that's not normal. So where we're always talking about the shortage of food in Africa, etc., but we've also got a problem in Europe where Europe actually doesn't produce enough to be self-sufficient. So that the shortfall needs to come from somewhere, and a lot of it is going to come from Africa, also Latin America. But I do know that Kenya and Zimbabwe, as well as a little bit of Malawi and South Africa, are big exporters to Europe, and especially to the Dutch. I mean, the Dutch are, I'd say, practically have the monopoly of fresh produce coming from Africa.
What we see, especially also as NABC, there is, I mean, if you look at fresh fruits and vegetables, the amount of bananas we're getting, for example, from Latin America is huge. And of course, the main question is, why we're getting it so far away? Well, it's much more efficient to get it, for example, from West Africa because it's way closer. And obviously that has to do also with scale, and supply and the stability in that. So in that sense, there is a huge opportunity. I would look at it in that way because there is a lot of interest exporting to Europe, gives higher prices than the internal market, although it is still important to also use the African markets. But still, there's an opportunity there to get some of the trade, which is now coming from South America, to actually make sure Africa starts producing there.
So my question, if we're going to discuss bananas, just as an example, I've had so many people in Mozambique and Zimbabwe calling me and saying like, "We've got so many bananas, we don't know what to do with them." We're closer even than Latin America. So what was the difference? Because one of the biggest components in trade is the logistics. So the logistics, especially nowadays, is costing a fortune to get things moved from one area of the world to the other. So how is it that everyone is importing from Latin America the bananas and not from Africa, whereas we're closer, and the quality is still going to be the same? So that's an interesting question. I don't know if any of you might have some perspective on the matter.
No, but of course they've been
Yeah.
growing bananas for dozens of years in Latin America. I mean, once you have your supplies, you have your contracts. I mean, I think it's also a matter of scale. I mean, there it's happening on a way larger scale, and that doesn't change that quickly. I mean, if a farmer from somewhere in Africa calls us, I have a bunch of bananas here, somebody wants to buy them. Yeah, it's very difficult because you can buy them now, but you don't know what about next month and the month after, etc. So, but there are definitely trends. We know there's NABC members which are in spices and also in organics. They're really looking at Africa, but yeah, supply. How many? Sometimes we get producers in Africa. They say, we have a lot of products. We can easily fill one container. Well, the Dutch company, for example, they start only counting when they can get 10 containers a
Yeah,
week.
so it's a problem of scale as well,
Problem of
maybe.
scale, logistics, things like that. So eventually they will hopefully get there, but there's still a lot to develop on that side.
Christian, is this also the reason why you started Sambuco?
It's one of the many reasons. So here's the example. I mean, the guys, I'm going to let's stay with the bananas just for a moment. Is the guys that I spoke to in Mozambique are sitting on 15,000 hectares of arable land, agricultural land, of which I think they had at the time, they had the equivalent, they were able to fill 6 to 8 containers at a time. And I'm saying to myself, okay, well, I need to find a market. But I was mainly approaching the French, who just said, well, no, we don't need it right now. But obviously, my network in the Netherlands is rather limited. But I mean, the great thing about here is you've got commercial farmer who's going to consolidate for the outgrowths. So the smaller guys will then come and deliver to the commercial farmer who's got thousands of hectares, and then we'll be able to supply at large scale. I mean, if that's really what the problem is, we have the solution, and we'll put the people in touch with the right people. And on top of that, an outgrowth program is a lot more sustainable than Latin America. I mean, Latin America, you've got hundreds of thousands of hectares. It's one operation. How is it benefiting in a sustainable way the population? Here in Africa, we've got smaller commercial farmers, but then who run outgrow operations and systems, but not only within a country but cross border. I mean, I have a friend here who does sugar beans, ground nuts, and popcorn, and he's got hundreds of hectares in Zimbabwe, some in Malawi, Zambia, Botswana, and he consolidates everything. He finances 50% of it. But now we need to get the people who are interested in purchasing from Europe. And we know the demand is there.
The demand is there, of course, but what then exactly is the main challenge you're facing?
Marketing and in terms of finding the right buyers. So we find that there's a lot of middlemen. I'll use the French example of the Groupe Carrefour hypermarkets. Before any product gets to their shelves, there's at least 5 or 6 intermediaries, which is not sustainable because if you think about it, not all of these guys are adding value in that food chain. I'm going to take a solid example of rooibos tea, only grown in South Africa. X farm, the price is a very good price to the farmer, is €9 a kilo. By the time it gets to the shelves in a non-luxury packaging in Carrefour, that price is between 140 and 160 euros per kilo. And you can go on to carrefour.com and look it up yourselves. There's too many middlemen. And I can guarantee you the person who's benefiting the least out of it is the farmer. It's obvious. So what we were trying to do with Zambuco is put people directly in touch with the supplier because we're trying to create a safe trading environment on our platform. Our due diligence before they even come near our platform, we visited them, we've been on their farm, and I drive around and I go around with someone who's been a farmer all his life, and with an agronomist, and with all the experts that one needs to make sure that whatever we say we can do is done. That's the big difference between us. I know one of the questions that are going to come up are probably going to be how do we fare compared to Alibaba, but we're on the ground and we conduct a full due diligence every time systematically on the vendor side.
So that due diligence, how does that work?
Well, we verify due diligence, verify that whatever the person says they can do. So if someone says, well, I can produce 1,000 tons of sugar beans, well, I'm going to come and look at your farm. How many hectares are you planting? And make sure that you have planted that and that you've got the infrastructure that can cope with being able to produce 1,000 tons. That's due diligence. We make sure that you're a registered company, that you're above board, that you're in good standing financial order, etc., etc. That's a lot of work that goes into it, but once by the time they get to onboarding on the platform, if they're selling something, we know that they are going to sell it. It's not a case of someone in the Netherlands is going to say, well, I'm looking for 1,000 tons of sugar beans, pays 30% down and waits for it and will never get it. which has happened to me on other platforms, but several times where you pay for goods or partially pay for goods and the goods don't even arrive. That's because the due diligence has not been done, and that's because those are just a platform making life easy for everyone. No due diligence is done. The scams that you find on all the major platforms is incredible. It really is, and it's sad, and we're trying to fight that.
It's also bad news for Africa in general. If you try to buy something from a Zambian or Zimbabwean farmer and you never get it.
And we make sure that if you're going to place an order with us, you will get it. There's obviously cas de force majeure, if there's terrible climate catastrophe, etc. I mean, we can't be held responsible for it, but that's why we have insurances that are in place. The farmer has his insurance. The buyer should have his insurance just in case. But it's really time that we create that safe environment to trade, and that's what we're doing.
All right. So you're mostly active in Zimbabwe right now?
Zimbabwe. I've got a team in South Africa, in the Johannesburg area, as well as in the Western Cape. I have someone in Zambia. I have someone in Kenya, where I'm going to be going. And basically, we're setting up, and I've got my network in the whole of SADC region. Not employed directly, but if I need to go and verify something, I either get in a car or I take a plane, and I go and verify it. And it's as simple as that.
What kind of farming products do we need to think of that are being sold on your platform?
Only bananas?
No, geez, anything you want. So the way we've looked at it and structured it is, we have access to hundreds of thousands of hectares. A lot of it is sitting idle farmland, and what we're trying to do is, so we've got partners who are specialized in farm management, and every farm manager is specialized in a specific or two or three different crops, and we would then put them on that specific farm. But first of all, it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. When you speak to people in Europe, we say, well, we've got access to this and to quite a lot of fresh produce. They say, okay, what do you have? And then on this side, they'll say, what do they want? How do you solve that? So basically, it would be better if those who are looking to buy tell us, okay, this is what we need. This is the yield that we're expecting, or the quantities that we want to import. Can you do it? And we will say, yes, we can do it. This is where it'll be done. These are the managers that will be put on it, and this is how it's going to be grown and produced and then shipped, etc. So that's the kind of conversation we're trying to have with both sides of.
Yeah, you also mentioned marketing is important. Of course, when I think of farms in Zimbabwe, I tend to think of farms that were owned by white owners and that have been taken over. That's like the image that I have
That's
in my
also the
mind now.
first thing I thought of, yeah.
Yeah. So when I think of buying farming products from Zimbabwe, it gives me a bit of a bitter aftertaste, basically. Is that something that you keep running into? And how do you handle that?
Okay, so there's various ways of handling it, and we're in the thick of it. My father was a white farmer, so also fell victim to that. All my friends are the same, but it's at some point we decided, our generation decided, like, there's no point in crying over spilt milk and holding grudges, or being angry about things, because it's not going to provide the solutions. So we more or less have the mentality forgive and forget to a certain extent. I just hope it won't be badly interpreted, but anyway, forgive and forget, and what are we going to do about it? So there's a lot of land that's beeper protected, and it really is. We're getting involved in an operation just outside of Harare, which is where the land has been actually given back to the original owners, and because it was beeper protected land. So that's one thing. The other is quite a few SEZs are being cordoned off. People say, okay, we're going to allocate X amount of hectares, and that is a special economic zone, so nobody can touch it, etc. The other thing, I mean, this is at a lot smaller scale, is you have some people who've benefited from the land reforms, but you're sitting on the idle land and have decided that we want this land to be productive. And we've been approached and said, can we do it? And we said, we can't do anything if it's on contested land. How can we solve that solution? And actually, one of them, and then we replicated that, said, well, what we could do is we find out who the original owner is, we start producing, and we allocate a percentage of that to pay that farmer back, which is quite an interesting way of looking at it. Obviously, it's very quiet at the moment because it's very one person here and there, but we're trying to actually get a lot more people interested, and the people who are forward thinking are actually thinking it's a very, very good idea to adopt this sort of strategy if they want to stay on the farm. The problem is there's too many idle farms, people who are sitting on the farm and owning these farms but without producing anything, and that's a problem. And we're here, we'll say, okay, well, we would like to make sure that that farm starts producing.
Right. Yeah. Because I also saw in a video that it's also your goal to support 1 million farmers by 2025. How are you going to do that?
Outgrowing outgrows programs mainly. So we're going to be creating hubs in each country. So where we've got commercial farmers in strategic regions, and then with that we'll then speak to the smaller communities and farms who are on 2, 3, 4, 5 hectares. We've got a group of people here who are looking at growing garlic in an outgrows program, and then we have a commercial farmer who's got it, and he centralizes and consolidates everything, and then makes sure that all the outgrow farmers are doing the right way. So there's a sort of a skills transmission involved in it, as well as just a community upliftment.
Christian, can you explain a little bit what exactly an outgrowing is versus a commercial farmer?
So an outgrower is somebody who grows on behalf of a bigger operation. So it's somebody who doesn't have a big structure, and so they will have a small plot of land, say 1, 2, 3, up to, let's call it, 10 hectares, and they will grow whatever is needed by the bigger farmer who doesn't have enough land to cater for the volumes that he's being asked to push out. So, for example, we could say there's a farmer who's doing 1,000 tons, and in the Netherlands, the demand is 2,500 tons of sugar beans. The commercial farmer, has only got land for 1,000 tons, and then he's going to around. You've got the rural areas around his farm with smaller plot of land, and he'll say, if you grow this, I will buy it off you. And then he will then, obviously, that will consolidate and make up for his shortfall, so that he can then sell his 2,500 tons to his buyer. So that's how an outgrows program works.
Are you also consulting farmers on becoming more efficient and productive, or is it just a marketplace? And can you tell us a little bit more about how you consult these farmers?
So the way it works is basically we always go around with a farm manager. So we'll have, for example, a farmer will say, well, I this is the land I have. I'm not too sure what I must grow or what I can grow. And in which case we come and we have an agronomist who will take soil samples and say, okay, well, this soil is very polluted. This is what you need to do. We look at regenerative agriculture. So, tobacco is a big problem in Zimbabwe because it just kills the soils. But we're looking at systems where we can work around that. There's, in terms of, they always need machinery or inputs, and that's where we say, okay, well, we have the network to provide you the right inputs for that type of soil. You need equipment, agricultural equipment. Well, we have the appropriate partners, and if you've got a history, past performance, you've been farming for 3 years or more, we have a look at you, and we can actually finance your equipment. That will generally come, most of the time it comes from the Netherlands. With everyone you've got, Devolf, etc. And then it's on a 3, 5 or 7 year finance program. So we do that. Energy is a big problem in Southern Africa. So we've got partners who supply commercial setups so that you don't have any downtime. You always got power to run your operations. There's so many ways that we actually help the farmers. It all depends. Everything is tailor made to circumstances.
Right, but this sounds like much more than just, well, the Alibaba comparison. Of course, we have to leave that behind because you sound like much more than just a marketplace now. That's also what you're aiming for in the future.
Absolutely. So we're a tech company, very small tech. What we've noticed is that we mentioned briefly the marketing. So we've noticed that the marketplace is quite daunting for a lot of people here, where they don't even have a digital presence. Forget the website, forget the social media. They've got absolutely nothing, and so getting a market, a global market, let alone export, is quite difficult. So we're here. We approach them and we say, okay, come on to our B2B. You can sell your products, and for them, it's too daunting. So we've recognized that, but however, they do understand marketing. So instead of saying, oh, can we the B2B, we're interested, they say, do you do, by the way, marketing? So yes, we do marketing. Okay, so could you do the marketing for us? That's where they're at. So the idea of actually setting them up, giving them a digital presence so they get familiar with it. Basically, we take them through the journey from completely off the grid onto the digital world, and then from there, slowly they'll be able to migrate onto a B2B marketplace, which is the ultimate goal, of course. But we help them all along. We'll provide them with their own website. We get them familiar with social media and marketing and all sorts of tools and skill sets, so that they can get some form of presence and visibility. Because at the end of the day, without it, we ain't going to get anywhere very fast.
One other problem is that many African countries have is that not too much of value is added before exporting. So is agriculture just like exporting raw materials, or what kind of extra value could be added to keep most of the economic gains more in Africa itself instead of the middleman or the party that adds more value to an agricultural product?
Okay, so that's a very, very good question and point that we're trying to address. Is we're trying to look into a scenario where we start adding value. So food processing is one of them. So, for example, here in Zimbabwe, we have a couple of people who do the food processing, but it's nowhere near as big as it should be. So there's a lot of waste, actually, of produce that gets wasted because there's a lack of energy. To You go to the rural areas, there's no fridges. You go to the open markets, it's not refrigerated. It's not like going to Rungis in Paris, where it's a town, a refrigerated town. So a lot of things, if it's not sold today, well, you're going to have to throw that away, because with the heat and everything, it's there's far too much waste. So that goes back to our original question. We're wasting a lot of produce, which could feed those who are starving. So if it's not sold today, you can go to the processing plant and they'll buy whatever you left over with. That's one of the ideas that we had. But food processing is definitely important. We have it; it's very small, but there's huge scope to scale and grow that. So my idea would be: can there not be one of the big agri companies in Europe, one, two, or three of them, who would be interested to actually set up their factory to cater for the African market? I mean, that would be sustainable. That would be value adding. That would be, I don't know. It makes sense, and it wouldn't take much to get here. Done in China, it's done everywhere else. Why not here?
Arne, is that a problem you see on a broader scale in Africa?
Yeah, I mean, of course, we prefer talking about the challenges and the solutions for it. But I mean, no, it's a problem, but it's also a business case, right? I mean, there's a lot of NABC members that are selling cold stores. There's cold stores, there's cool stores. There's a difference between the two. Potatoes, for example, you need a certain temperature. You can keep them for months. If you don't have that, they get spoiled after a couple of days or weeks. Those are very crucial things, and yeah, definitely there's interest for that on the African side. There's supply here from Europe, and that's where indeed change can happen. Development, like also he also mentioned, post harvest loss is really like a big thing, a big theme in food production. Like where there are places where almost half of the food which is being produced get lost after a while because there's no storage, there's no. If you can just reduce that, if you're talking about quadrupling output, you can already double it by making sure that there's you don't have so much food loss.
But it always comes down to financing. So, I mean, I would be more than happy to take on the risk of setting up all these warehousing, simple structured warehousing, obviously everything off the grid, run off solar, because we've got plenty of that here. That takes care of the energy problem. So we create hubs where we have were collection points for the outgrowers, even for the commercial growers, and then these get collected for whatever goes to export goes to export. What stays locally sold locally, and whatever's left over gets processed, and that would be key. I mean, I would be delighted to be partnered up with a Dutch, French, or whatever company in Europe, to be able to set up this sort of infrastructure here, and then run it. But the problem is that's a big capex. But if I was in Europe, I could do it in Europe because, oh, you're in Europe, fine. How much money do you need? Okay, you go to the bank and they say, okay, here's 5 million euros, to because you're paying for infrastructure. That's fine, and you pay it back over X amount of time. We could access that as a business that's registered, in Europe, but in the UK, but also in Africa, etc. I mean, it would make sense, and there would be amazing returns. I mean, the returns, there's no question on it. But without that infrastructure, we're going to run into a lot of problems.
I'm starting to get a good idea of what kind of solutions you offer for producers in Africa. Well, we've all seen that, especially according to the literature, trade policies, insufficient infrastructure, non-convertible currencies, and high density of linguistic diversity. These are all barriers to trade with African countries. Can you tell us a little bit more about what Sambuco is doing to overcome these bottlenecks for overseas buyers? So buyers from the Netherlands, for example.
So, geez, that's quite a big one, because there's a lot of, what we call the pain points that are encountered, and the pain points are all related to, for example, cross-border payments, as you mentioned, all the different currencies, etc. But logistics is another one. But we're actually moving forwards in the right directions. We're trying to partner up with logistics companies around Africa. Also, one of the big important ones to take into consideration is trade finance. Trade finance is available for the huge global companies, but when it comes down to SMEs and smaller structures, there's nobody in that space, or very few people. I see in the tech world, everyone's saying we're doing this, we're doing that, but concretely, as soon as I send anybody there, oh no, but, and there's too many oh no buts. So it's time we found a financial institution or a fund that would help us to do that, because I mean, there's legitimate businesses that are suffering because of lack of access, to good finance, to good everything. We take it for granted in Europe, and I wish that would, be there would be a repercussion here in Africa. By opening the market, that'll help the locals as well, because we do tend to find a couple of cartels who say, well, who are happy with the current status where farmers are don't have access to the outside market, and these guys says, well, you're either going to sell it to us or you're not going to sell it to anybody, so this is the price we're offering you. That is something that we need to address. The only way to address it is by opening up the market, giving access to the outside of what is available inside.
Before we're going to specify or talk about the opportunities, I want to go over to Alexander Valeton from Media HQ for his column of this episode.
The EU-Africa trade balance. On a rainy day in November 2008, I packed my bags and left Amsterdam to go to Africa. I looked around, met with people, worked in an office, and a few years later, I set up my own business. Now, in November 2021, I am still here in Kenya, running small businesses and trying to understand what I'm doing. I want to talk about the EU-Africa trade balance, but first a small anecdote. There are always these waves of agriculture trends that farmers dive into hoping to catch some easy cash. It starts with an individual success story, and then that story is backed up by others who copy it and become rich. And then suddenly thousands of people jump on the bandwagon, and then there is too much production, and the whole pyramid collapses, except for a few pros who thought longer and have solid business plans. Recently we had gooseberries. How many gooseberries did you eat today? We had quail eggs. They were all over the place, and now you can't find them anywhere anymore. We had rabbit urine. It's a very good fertilizer, but harvesting is a bit difficult. And now we have an avocado case. Over the last 6 or 7 years, there was a huge investment in the avocado business. The global demand for avos is huge, and here in East Africa, they grow easily and in abundance. But the wrong ones. The fruits here are heavy and not fit for export since they ripen unevenly. If one side is still not ripe, the other one already starts rotting. They are only good for avocado oil, which, by the way, is not being produced here in Africa. The ones for export are the Fuente and the Hass avocados, small and with a leathery skin, easy to pack, easy to measure the fat content, and easy to grow. So many farmers converted to the Hass and Fuente expecting to have access to the global market. Farmers were probably too greedy. They have signed contracts that they couldn't live up to, so they have exported too young, unripe, and small fruits. The shipments were rejected by the buyers, and in order not to lose face, the Kenyan government stopped export of all avocados. What? All? Yes, all. There were huge investments involved, economical plans based on the avocado business, and with an obvious trickle down effect to even the smallholder farmers. And now, farmers, small and big, can't export because of the Kenyan government regulations, and the harvested avocados are rotting away in storages. Maybe this is another collapse of a pyramid. This is the end of that small anecdote. Not only farmers have a hard time exporting to the EU, it counts for almost all businesses. If you look at the trade between EU and Africa, it is more or less in balance according to the figures of the World Bank. In coins, that is. But it doesn't benefit the people here. The EU is importing raw materials from Africa, and that money is going straight into the governmental suitcases. And Africa is importing manufactured goods that the people in the street buy. All the value addition is done in the EU, and the end consumers pay for it. The EU-African trade agreements seem nice, but the litany of non-tariff barriers plus the domestic supply constraints are a huge hurdle for producers in Africa. The European Aid for Trade package is mainly helping EU partners and not the African counterparts, certainly not the ones that want to export. If you add that up with the internal EU tensions, whereby former colonizers like to maintain an influence in their former foothold, and add that to the disturbing Chinese influence here as well, then you kind of get the picture. Go back to that producer then. He or she knows that growth could come from export to the EU. The local market is wobbly, the African internal market is even more complex and harder to reach. But to tap into the EU administration, the tax systems, and to build trust with off-takers, that is too complex. The former German Minister of International Trade said, "It is not difficult for an African producer to export to the EU. It is impossible." And just one final remark. When I came to Africa, I had the chance to explore, to see potential, build relations. Africans who want to come to Europe, to find business partners, to build trust, to test markets, simply don't get visa. Even guys with fairly big businesses just can't hop on that plane. I can fly back and forth whenever I like. And maybe that is the best illustration of the off balance in the trade relations. And certainly it makes me very uncomfortable.
What do you think of that? Do you have a reaction?
Jeez, I don't even know where to start, but there's a lot of valid points, really valid points that were mentioned there.
What's the one thing that stood out for you?
It's tricky. It's we have where he has plenty of examples where it's not working, where the German minister says it's impossible. That's where I'd say no, that's not true. It is possible. It's just finding the right way of doing it. And I mean, I see examples even in Zimbabwe where we've got a couple of farmers who have never stopped exporting and who've got their relationships, etc. And we've got, and that needs to be said. It's also important to also notice that we're terrible at marketing ourselves. We're only talking about the problems in Africa and very little about, there are people coming up with solutions. So that's to be noted as well.
That's what we're here for, Christian.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, the avocado problem in Kenya, that was sad, but at the same time, we've got here in Zimbabwe people exporting avocados, macadamia nuts, etc. So without a problem, how does it? How do we find a way to make sure that the playing field is leveled out for everybody? And that's what we need to do. The only way it is possible is create opening up the market and making sure that there's due diligence. We need to get people regaining trust in doing business with Africa, and it's not a unicorn sort of situation where you put in X amount and you're going to get Y unicorn sums of money back. It's a slow, long process. You have to be patient in Africa. You can't come here with millions and expect results overnight, because unfortunately it doesn't work like that.
That's an important lesson, of course, that we have to take into account. Talking about opportunities, one thing that I read is that the intracontinental trade is only good for about 2% of many African GDPs. So, for example, Nigeria sells most of its palm oil abroad, and then Kenya, for example, buys most of its palm oil from Malaysia. Why is there no bilateral trade? And is this also a big opportunity for you?
Absolutely. So, I mean, that was actually the African Free Continental Trade Agreement was what triggered me founding and launching Zambuco Market, because it was prime time, and the fact that most of the countries have ratified the agreement is great news. If we look at, is there cross border and bilateral trade? Yes, there is. That's why we've got the SADC region, we've got ECOWAS, we've got the Eastern African Trade Bloc, Central Africa. These guys all trade amongst each other. If you saw just even physically the amount of goods that come through Zimbabwe from South Africa going up to Zambia, the cross border trade here in Southern Africa is huge. But nobody knows or talks about it. The locals do, because there's queues for days at the Beitbridge border post coming into Zimbabwe, and most of the time that those goods are transiting and going up into Zambia. So everything comes in via South Africa and goes out via South Africa, which is a little bit of a problem, and we're trying to change that and distribute it equally. But there is cross-border trade. There is. I mean, that's what keeps us going. Without that cross-border trade, Zim would not be able to survive.
For our listeners, Zim is Zimbabwe.
Yes, sorry, Zimbabwe.
We have almost come to an end, but there's just one promising question that I want to ask. Are you ready for that one, Christian?
Okay, go ahead.
All right.
Fire away.
Let's get there. Okay. So, will Africa develop from having food shortages to supplying the world with African grown food by 2050?
Yes, I'd even say before that.
Before that?
Boom.
Wow, you're positive. And why even before that?
Because climate is ideal, everything is ideal. It's just a question of changing mindsets. Once that's done, it's going to happen, and it's going to happen fast.
And whose mindsets need to be changed? Our mindsets, African mindsets?
Everyone's everyone's mindsets, because if you take into consideration that the Chinese have heavily invested in different sectors here in Africa, the reason why their economy is booming is partly on the back of trading with Africa. After that, there's various ways of looking at it. But 30 years ago, where was China? They were where we are today, except that all their raw materials, they get it from where? From Africa. So the day that we decide to start adding value to our raw materials is going to change everything. I think there's a way forwards with the African Free Trade Agreement, etc., of cross-border trade in Africa, as well as trading with Europe, Middle East, and going west. And I think that over the next 10 years, 15 years, we're going to see a massive, massive difference. I think it's possible. And I do think that we are going to be feeding the world by 2050 at the latest.
What about you, Arne?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds promising. Obviously, it's still far. I mean, there's a couple of factors we do obviously need to into account, like how quickly the population keeps growing in Africa. What
Climate change.
Climate change going to be? I was just going to say that I've seen maps that certain areas are experiencing or potentially having less agricultural output in the coming 10, 20, 30 years. But combined with what I just said about the potential to still increase and to use a little bit more advanced techniques, there's there's definitely still a lot of growth possible.
Would you like to put a wager on it? We'll meet in 2050 and see if Africa is actually feeding the world or not.
We'll meet in Harare in 2050. Let's agree all of that. We're still all young guys, so we'll still be there in 2050.
Definitely.
We'll be, let's do that.
Yeah, we have this podcast as proof now. So let's do that. Sounds like a good idea.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We have already come to the end of this episode about agriculture and business solutions for African trade. You can listen to all our podcasts back on Spotify and our website, which is africast.org. NL. If you want to know more about the Netherlands African Business Council, just go to www.nabc.nl. Thank you for listening to this episode, and special thanks to our guest Christian Daimar de Jabrun, the CEO of Zambuco. Christian, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Yuri. Thanks, everybody, for having me on the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure to exchange with you.
We were also very happy to record this special episode at Werf 5 in Utrecht, downtown in a wharf. And also thanks to Alexander Valeton from Media HQ for the sharp column. And thank you, Arne Doornbal from NABC, for being here and for asking some very good questions. Jos,
always a pleasure.
Thank you as well for being my wonderful co-host. Today's editing was in the wonderful hands of Ruben Elans. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another Dutch episode. Thank you for listening to the Africast.